Welcome to episode 33 of Disc and Dice. My name's Paul. I'm joined, as always, by Timmy and JT.
Hello, hello.
Howdy.
And, of course, we are here to talk about some games. But before we get into that, how you guys doing?
Not too bad. Not kind of had enough of this isolation stuff, I suppose. But, you know, still getting through lots of gaming, which I suppose is a good trade-off.
Yeah, I've been getting very good at video conferencing. It's basically every other day there's a video conference happening of some description with family and friends and things like that. So, but yeah, just doesn't beat the real thing of being in the same room as someone, does it?
It really doesn't. You know what? Total aside here, I saw an article the other day from the BBC, so reputable source, about how like Skype and Zoom chats drain your energy so much more because your brain has to work harder to pick up on visual and audio clues just because you know video is lower quality than real life.
And the constant sort of, you know, someone says something and then, you know, there's like that delay and then you kind of have to adjust for that. And you're like constantly, you know, conversations don't flow as well because there's this constant stopping and starting because someone talks when someone else is talking and they're like, oh, sorry, you go. So
yeah, because of that delay, you can't read the flow of the conversation at all.
yes.
I also wonder if, like, you know how when you try to read in the car, your body can sense that you're moving, but your eyes are on a stationary thing, and so you kind of get like headaches and your body struggles to fully understand what's going on. I wonder if, like, you know, if people aren't setting up at a nice like study desk or whatever, if they're just laptop on their lap while they're video conferencing, if, you know, they're confusing their bodies by being relaxed but trying to stay switched on in like a business frame of mind.
There's some kind of like mental dissonance there between like I'm having a conversation with a person, but the sort of sensory input is not what it should be, and apparently it kind of messes you up a bit. Like I guess when I read it, I sort of thought like, yeah, when I finish like a long Skype call, whether it's for like work or whether it's with family or something, I do feel a little bit like you kind of like exhale and you're like, oh, that was a bit tiring. And I just thought it was because my family was annoying.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I guess it depends on, like, do you reckon that goes for all of the different kind of video conferences, or are they talking about specifically business? Because, like, if you're just like someone who can quite easily sit back and relax and leave your laptop pointing at you, is it still going to take it out of you, do you reckon? Like you mentioned doing ones with your family, are you still finding them tiring?
I'd probably do a little bit more. It's supposed to be, according to these studies on it, it's supposed to be specifically to do with like, or one of the things is video. And so if you treat it like a phone call, I think you probably don't have as much problem. But if you treat it like a face-to-face conversation, then you can't process sort of, you know, facial expressions as well.
And I guess like the thing at the moment is like with stuff like House Party and Zoom and stuff, everybody's trying to do like conference calls with like up to like 8 of their friends at once, right?
Oh,
And so, like, you know, when you go out to a pub or whatever, or a house party or whatever, you're rarely all sitting around the one table, all paying attention to the same person talking. Like, you kind of section off, right? So it's kind of a form of interaction that we don't actually normally do, you know? Like, it's a weird replacement.
That's true, actually. I didn't even think of that. Like you know, you don't usually like sit around with 8 people and one person talks at a time.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the Disc and Dice psychology segment over and done with.
Yeah.
I feel like every episode we've got like a new sort of we dabble in different ideas and themes and genres completely. Might have to list us on a whole bunch of different podcast things on Spotify and that now, Paul.
Tune in a fortnight for us to create the vaccine for coronavirus.
I kind of like that this little opening bit of the show is often not about games.
Must be so confusing to like new listeners to come along. They're like, "What have I clicked on?"
It must be confusing for that new listener who downloads a podcast without researching at all what it's about. I do that all the time.
You got to make them work for it.
That's true. That is true.
It's the test. It's to make sure they're still listening after the the opening banter.
Well, if you have made it through these first 5 or 6 minutes, then we are going to talk about games for the rest of our time here. And Timmy, you're going to kick us off here with a game you're playing that I have literally never heard of.
Yeah, so it's actually a game I finished. Like, it's a pretty short one. It's a little indie game called Bendy and the Ink Machine. So first of all, JT, have you heard of this one?
I haven't. No.
Okay. I thought
Tell me about it.
Yeah, I thought you might because it seems to be all over YouTube. I was like heaps familiar with it before I even saw the game available for purchase anywhere because of the YouTube channels my boys watch. They have they watch streamers that are aimed at children, and they also watch those rap battle videos, and there's heaps of these accounts that just make like music videos and musicals about video game characters, and Bendy is all over all of those. There's so much content for Bendy on YouTube, and I thought it was just like a little flash game at first, and then I was watching somebody play through it, like Funnel Vision or something, and I realized it had this real like kind of Bioshock feel to it. So suddenly I was interested. I was in an EB Games and we spotted it, and we were nearly going to buy it for our youngest when we realized it's actually a horror game and we probably shouldn't have been letting him watch any videos on YouTube about it in the first place. But then a couple weeks later, Shayla and I both independently got a talking and realized that we'd both just been thinking about that game since we saw it in the shop. Like, it just stuck with us. So I picked it up, and the general concept is that Bendy, the titular Bendy, is like a old school Mickey Mouse type character. Like, think Steamboat Mickey era, like that kind of sepia toned black and white cartoon, very all smiles and bow ties and gloves and stuff like that. And you were kind of, it's unclear at the start of the game. You're in this world which, from what your character is saying and the bits of information you're picking up, is the studios where you used to draw Bendy, like you were an animator at this studio, but it looks all old-fashioned 2D. So, it's kind of unclear. Am I in the cartoon world of Bendy, or am I at the studio? And it's all very clearly modeled on Walt Disney. Like, the studio is named after their head creator and animator, Joey Drew. Like, Bendy is a Mickey Mouse type thing. There's a character called Boris that looks so much like Goofy. I'm shocked the game hasn't been sued to oblivion by Disney. But yeah, it's like this episodic kind of horror game. They say horror survival, but you don't run out of lives. It's just constant respawns, kind of like Bioshock. And in fact, I'm going to be saying that a lot. This game really walks a tightrope between a loving homage to Bioshock and a straight ripoff. Like, I don't know where I come down on it because I love Bioshock, but there's so much going on. Like, it just looks like a indie version of Bioshock. But yeah, you're the animator of Bendy, and you're visiting the studio, and there's all these weird ink monsters everywhere. It's all gone horribly wrong, and you are picking up like voice recording tape decks, just like in Bioshock, that are kind of feeding you the story while you're trying to find your old work colleague who invited you to come and check it all out. So this game is everywhere, and I knew all about it before I got to the game. And it's episodic. It's really short. It's only 5 chapters. You can finish it in, I think, 4 hours if you smash through it, 7 if you kind of take your time doing everything. I played it on Switch. It is available on everything. And Shayla's played it too. And both of us have our concerns. Like, I think, first and foremost, it is very obviously an indie game. And I know that, like, indie is a pretty broad term these days, and there's lots of really great indie titles. This definitely lacks the polish of a major studio release, and not just because it's short or whatever. Like, a lot of indie games are short, and because they're shorter, it allows them to really give their games an air of professionalism. This game had a lot of shortcomings. Like, it would often give you your objective, and it would be very vague about what you actually have to do or what order you have to do things in, and not in a we're not going to hold your hand sort of way, just in a what, like, how was I meant to work out I need to do that sort of way.
I got a pretty good like sense of the, I guess, like tone of this game from what you said, but I'm a little unsure about like gameplay wise. You said you get Bioshock vibes. Is that in like the atmosphere and aesthetic, or is that because it's like a first person or like third person actiony type game? Like what kind of game is it?
It's the atmosphere and the aesthetic. This studio that you're in is like very much like Rapture in the first Bioshock game, you know, like something very wrong has happened here and there aren't really people around anymore. Anyone you come across has lost their mind and they're instantly trying to attack you, and it seems very cult-like. They have scrawled messages along the wall. There are like fallen banners that like there's all these posters in like a 1940s kind of propaganda style, just like in Bioshock. When you get your objectives, often it's someone talking over a loudspeaker directing you what to do. The music, what there is you know, again, of that time, and it'll just play in the background as if through a tinny speaker while you do something. When you come face to face with one of the people that's been giving you your objectives and directions, they're often behind a sheet of glass doing something that you're forced to watch and you can't do anything about before they say send you on your way to gather the next thing. The things that are on the wall are like he will save us, the angel is not who you think, and stuff like that. Like just these vague kind of philosophical. It's Bioshock without the philosophy behind it. You know, like Bioshock did all of this stuff because they were analyzing Ayn Rand and communism and objectivism and all these kinds of interesting things. And this is just like, hey, wasn't that a cool vibe? Like, let's do that. And when I got to the end of the game, it unlocked this thing called the archives, and it was just like a room I could walk around, and it kind of let me. It was like behind the scenes stuff, so it would have like a picture of like the alpha version of Bendy and a write up about it. And they explained that this first chapter of the game was built in like a week by just these friends that kind of decided to develop a game together, and it blew up on Twitter. And so then they expanded it, and that's really obvious, and it kind of made me go, I guess that's why this is so overt, because no one sat down and planned this game out. They kind of drew Bendy first and went, hey, this would be fun to make it like a game, like you're in an old studio. And they kind of probably went, we're just doing a little like 1 hour game, you know, and so we can make it look a bit like Bioshock. And then it blew up, and so now they're going to make 4 more chapters. And what are you going to do? You've gone, okay, so what do we do next? We'll keep borrowing, you know?
Right. Okay. And so does it, like, back to my question, does it play like Bioshock? Like I still don't really get what kind of game this is.
Sorry. So they call it a horror survival game. You never have any powers and never any like projectile weapons. It's all melee. Sometimes you have an axe. Sometimes you have like a pipe or a crowbar kind of thing. Pretty much every quest is collect these things or find a way to get into this room, and so it's all fetch quests of varying degrees. You have an action button, which is Y, to open doors, to hide, and you have the trigger, which allows you to whack people with whatever you happen to have, be it the axe or whatever. And that's pretty much it. You're walking most of the big bad guys. Like there is a big bad Bendy who's been animated by the ink machine, and he looks mutated and gross, and you can't beat him or outrun him. When he starts coming near, you have to hide in like a locker or whatever. It's a bit like Alien Isolation in that sense. There are lesser enemies around, like these little ink men that you can beat up with your axe or pipe, but Bendy you have to just hide from and wait for him to go away.
Right, that's a real horror game thing, you know?
Yeah,
the kind of like the enemy you can't kill and have to run from. It's like those I know JT, you played those I'm forgetting the name of those horror games that were really popular.
Amnesia.
Amnesia
Yeah,
has the
Amnesia's
same
probably
kind of
the
thing.
it's probably the first one that had the, like run and hide mechanic, and you've got no weapons.
Yeah, and I know those Resident Evil remakes have a similar thing, though I think that might have been added in for those. But anyway, go on, Timmy.
Yeah, I mean, like that. That's the long and the short of it, really. Like I said, it's a short game, so like it doesn't wear out its welcome. Kind of going, go and find this, go and do that. Sometimes it'll be like you pick up one of the tape decks with the video diaries, and it'll be the janitor talking about having lost his keys and where he was, and so you use that to go and find his keys. Other times, one of the characters will talk to you directly. The game pretty much never lets you progress too much. Like at the end of every chapter, you kind of either fall to a new level, or you get captured by somebody, or you get knocked out and you wake up without anything again. So if it doesn't want you to have an axe, you don't get an axe in this next area you're in. There's only a pipe to pick up, sort of thing. Yeah, there are puzzles, I guess you could call them puzzles. Nothing very taxing. Like there's one when you have to get these ink in this machine in 3 cylinders, all the same level, but you just turn 3 knobs until they're the same level. Like it's not like if you turn the far right knob, it makes 2 of them go up, and the one of them makes the other 2. It's just you turn all 3 of them till they're the same, and it's marked clearly on there at what level they should be at, sort of thing. So like that. This is kind of why I'm saying, like, it's very obviously an indie game, and almost obviously like these guys' first proper game, because it's so simple.
Right, and it sounds very derivative of like other stuff that is better,
especially BioShock. And I think Shayla looked it up, and she mentioned that they put some stuff in one of the levels of the games that are props from Fort Frolic.
Right.
I didn't notice them myself, but I noticed like characters being named Cohen and people being made into sculptures, except this time it's out of ink instead of being frozen into sculptures. So,
well, I did just see in the Wikipedia article for that book, for the game, just to get a better idea of it, and it actually did say that in some kind of interview or something, they said that it was straight up just inspired by BioShock, which is, I'm all for that, to be honest.
Yeah, and they wear it on their sleeve. They wear it on their sleeve.
Yeah, they're not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes.
Not at all.
It doesn't sound like this game comes with like a big Timmy stamp of recommendation.
Well, I think that they nailed the atmosphere and stuff. Like they do lots of cool stuff. Like there's lots of these bendy cardboard cutouts standing around, because you're essentially in like you're doing the studio tour of Walt Disney Studios. So, there's cardboard cutouts and whatnot. And you can whack them with your axe, and then when you come back around the corner, they'll just be back again. And I didn't feel like that was a respawning thing, because the game doesn't really have that. It was a very deliberate decision that something unworldly is going on here. Shayla played it before me, and she would sit next to me on the couch, gasping every couple of minutes, like the scares. And it wasn't like something jumped out at her. She's turned back to where she's just come from, and something new was there, or like suddenly a door is open, and that door wasn't open before, and she didn't open it. And so those kinds of putting you on edge kind of atmosphere, they did very well.
It almost looks like Cuphead and BioShock. BioShock had like a strange, weird baby.
Yes, yeah, that's a good way to describe it, actually. Yeah, I haven't played Cuphead, so I couldn't say if the gameplay is like that at all. But yeah, the character design, very much. And like I played the whole thing through, and like I kept going. Like I didn't really stray and come back to it or anything. So, I can't give it like a glowing endorsement, because I think it stepped over the line from homage to a bit of a ripoff. Like I felt like they ran out of their own ideas, but and also I won't say what happened, but I didn't love the ending. Like both gameplay, it was anticlimactic, and I guess they tried to have sort of a twist that it's one of the only games recently that I've Googled explain the ending. And the explanation was pretty much just what happened on the screen. So as I suspected, it just wasn't a very good ending.
Hey, at least you would have had no trouble finding a video for that, because literally every game and movie and TV show these days has an ending explained video.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say this: I bought it on Switch from EB Games for like $70, and it's absolutely not worth that.
$70.
Yeah,
Yeah, man. Yeah. So
Yikes.
we've had lots of discussions before about, a short game can be short and really good, and people who refund it on Steam because it was only 6 hours instead of, like 80, maybe have a look at what kind of game it is. It's telling a story, rah, 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 rah. But for an indie game that I played in about 5 hours, $70 is almost getting to AAA release prices,
absolutely.
Like the latest Call of Duty is free to play, like to get you into it, like I'm sure you could probably get Bendy and the Ink Machine on Steam for heaps cheaper. There's a mobile version that's like $11, which I noticed the other day, which made me quite upset.
Well,
so yeah, I recommend checking it out if you can get it cheap, but don't pay $70 on Switch for it.
that sounds like a fair call. Well, sticking with the horror theme, JT, last episode you began your Doom Odyssey, and has that been continuing?
Yeah, it has. I finished Doom 1, then I went through Doom 2. They didn't take too long to finish. Doom 2 is, more or less the same game as Doom 1.
Can I just quickly jump in, having played both back to back as you did? Which one did you enjoy more?
Probably Doom 1. Doom 2, I kind of looked it up. Doom 2 got all these shining awards for being this great game design and everything. And then when I played it, even though it's as limited as it is, being from the 90s, mid-90s, early 90s, whatever it is, it just had some of the most terribly confusing non-puzzle game design I've ever played. And I just didn't understand it, because Doom 1, all the 3 episodes were very well crafted. Things made sense. Things looked like the things they were meant to represent. And then Doom 2, it's because it's the big thing with Doom 2 is that it's hell on Earth. So it's not on Mars anymore. It's sort of broken through to our planet. And it's got levels like the suburbs, and it's just, they could have made something representative of a suburb, houses, things like that. But they just used weird assets to like try and make it just didn't make any sense. I mean, it's hard to explain, but for instance, you'd just be running around in what looks like a house, and then there would just be this strange trapezoid structure in the middle of it that was made out of wood. And it's like, I don't understand what that's meant to be. And then that would have something to do with something later on that is just not apparent. And the levels were just very, very, very confusing, and not in a puzzle way. The first game had legitimate puzzles that kind of made sense. They released a add-on expansion to Doom 2. I forget what that's called. And then that actually went back to what the first one was like, and that was actually much better. I actually really, really enjoyed that. So yeah, Doom 2, I don't really know why it got such glowing reviews back in the day, but I thought it was quite rubbish. But then I finished those, and then am now jumping into Doom 3. And yeah, I that game totally still holds up to this day. It was back when it first came out. It was this sort of it was almost like what's I'm trying to think of the best word. It's like a tech demo for how good the ID engine was at the time. It had like bump mapping on the surfaces, and all these different shaders and graphic upgrades that computers haven't seen in ages. And so it looks quite bad now, but just the way it has been put together in terms of like still the sound design and the atmosphere, it's genuinely creepy still. I'm actually playing through the game, and I'm not there's no real cheese factor anymore. You know, it's still probably as scary as what it would have been when it came out. So I'm really, really enjoying that at the moment. And I know, Timmy, that you've probably got a lot of stuff you want to talk to me about because you actually have finished it.
I was just going to say, JT, I am so pleased to hear that. I feel like I'm the only person that truly loves Doom 3, like to the point where like it's my favorite like Doom game. Like, to be fair, I haven't played either of the new ones, but like, you know, the first two, they were good fun for what they were. I was probably a little bit too young to play them properly, so I probably just button mashed a bit. But Doom 3 I thought was such a great game. Really good horror survival. I know that's probably why people didn't like it, because that's not what they're into Doom for. But yeah, I thought it was just a really solid game in its own right.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Timmy, that like I don't necessarily think it's that people say it's a bad game, although maybe like the criticism becomes that. It's more just like I'm kind of in this camp that like for me it's not a Doom game. Like it's not a bad game. It's just like they made a different game and called it Doom, and that game is fine, but it wasn't what I expected from the kind of big reboot of Doom after I don't know how long, like a decade or something since the last installment.
Yeah, that's fair enough. See, I guess, like I said, I didn't get to play a lot of the original Dooms. Like I played a bit. I probably played more of Wolfenstein, to be honest. But like, you know, we weren't allowed to install games on my dad's computer when we were little, and
Too
we
many
definitely
viruses.
weren't playing. Well, yeah, I mean, like he was a computer programmer who worked from home, and we had the one computer, so he really couldn't risk it. And also like the Doom at Wolfenstein as well, I suppose. But like they weren't appropriate for the age I was when those games were, you know, available on PC. You know, now they are again. You can get them, right, but you know those old kind of games that basically ran on DOS, kind of like computers got too good for them, and you had to have software to slow down those games. And so, like by the time I was old enough to play them, they weren't really available. But Doom 3 was, and so that's the one I got into.
I really, yeah, I agree with, you know, sort of both camps that it's a great game, but you know, there's this sort of element of it's not really a Doom game. But going through it, you know, it is as much of a Doom game as the other ones. And I think we sort of touched on this last pod, is just I think they were sort of limited by the technology back in the day, that they didn't really have the means to make a game with this very in-depth narrative, that, you know, sort of voice acting, things like that. They that just didn't exist. I think it does seem out of place because in the new reboots, in the, you know, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal and the old Dooms, you're this sort of one-man army unstoppable force. Whether in Doom 3 it's it's a bit slower, you're paced a bit more, and I almost feel like the protagonist from Doom 3, even though it's the same guy and as the other games, they could have almost made it not him, you know, not the Doom Slayer. It could have been like a, you know, like some other dude. But the thing that, yeah, no, sorry, go on, Timmy.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like while you're talking about that, like, you know, he could be a different person. It would have made more sense. Da, 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 da. I think, like in hindsight, that would have been a really good decision. But I feel like at the time, you know, if you look back at those old Doom games, you are just a guy, Doom guy, barely even have a name, and you're in hell and or Mars, and just shoot the bad guys. You know, I feel like the story was super secondary just when the original Doom came out. You know, like
absolutely.
like the plot, you know, basically non-existent story. You know, you could kind of make it what you want after the fact. It was just level after level of carnage. And, you know, that was what people wanted those games for. And I feel like coming to Doom 3, they probably went, we have so much more at our disposal now from like games development that we can tell a story and make it a little bit more realistic and rah, 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 rah. And you know what? Maybe they didn't realize that in doing that, they were taking away from the foundation of what made Doom beloved. But I couldn't fault someone for looking at that game from like the late 80s or early 90s and going, all right, now that video games like Half-Life and that have come out and storylines and narrative are a big thing. What can we do that's really interesting with Doom?
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up Half-Life, because when I playing Doom 3, it totally reminds me of the Half-Life series, and not as in like a rip-off or anything like that, but it's got that same sort of, you know, you're going into this facility, and there's a you know, the start of the game is like, you know, a pleasant equilibrium. You know, you're just going to work, but then there's all these breadcrumbs of like things are going wrong. You know, I love that in Doom 3 you can pick up the PDAs and interact with terminals and read emails and things, and it just adds this extra layer of what's going on. And then, you know, literally all hell breaks loose, and then, you know, stuff gets really, really serious. And it's like that in Half-Life as well. You know, you're Gordon Freeman, you rock up to work, an experiment happens, also that's working with teleportation. And then, you know, again, all hell breaks loose. And then you've got the new equilibrium, which is just like everything sucks and you've got to deal with this new situation. And so I really, really like, and Half-Life 2 also very similar. And I think that's why I like Doom 3 so much, is because it's got that kind of storytelling aspect to it in that way. And, you know, as you know, I'm a massive fan of Half-Life, so it was a bit of a no-brainer that I like it.
I think it's representative of a trend at that time as well, which maybe begins with Half-Life, but around that time, the sort of narrative first-person shooter is massively like in fashion, and just about every first-person shooter franchise at that point is trying to copy that. And it's only like a couple of years after Doom 3, I think, that you get like the Call of Duty start to do that thing, and you've got like the Medal of Honor games, which I remember were really big at that time as well for their sort of World War II storylines. And I feel like there's a bit of that too, that like right now it's, you know, it's pretty fertile ground for making a crazy like over the top shooter, whereas back then it's like that's not what the market wanted. Like it wanted these narrative linear stories, and so like that's the kind of game they made, which makes sense.
Well, and it's interesting because I feel like id Software did a very similar thing with, I think it was Quake 4 on the Xbox 360, maybe. Like it was early, like first version iteration of the Xbox 360. But Quake 4 was a really similar kind of appearance and storyline. But, you know, it didn't cop the same kind of backlash because it still felt a lot more Quake. So I wonder if they learnt from that, or if perhaps they had looked at their various things and gone, maybe we can consolidate Doom and Quake, and it didn't work out. So they've gone, all right, we'll leave Doom, but Quake can still be like this because it works for Quake. Are you experiencing any similarities? Because I know you played the Quake games, JT, and Doom 3 always struck me as having a lot in common.
They're basically, there's some people think or speculate that it's all in the same universe, as well as Wolfenstein. And the other thing is that apparently the Doom Slayer, BJ Blazkowicz, I think his name is, from Wolfenstein, and one of the other id Software protagonists,
Commander Keen.
Commander Keen, are actually all related to one another. I think that's actually canon.
They're all Blazkowiczes, yeah.
Yeah, but Quake 4 is built on the same engine as Doom 3, so it was built very, very close together, and it's another id Software sort of situation. But I haven't played Quake 4
Right.
yet, and I've loved all the Quake games.
Quake 4 was not made by id.
Oh, wasn't it?
I think it's made by someone else. I can't remember who, but I feel like they made up to 3, and then it went somewhere else after that. It may have, like, JT, you may be right about like the engine and stuff possibly all still being the same, but I think it went to a different developer after that.
Yeah, but I do actually want to play through Quake 4 just to sort of, you know, continue the Quake series, because I do like that. But yeah, I'm sure that there are a lot of similarities, and that, you know, Quake and Doom do have their inherent similarities. You know, Quake is sort of like another representation of hell, I think, in the storyline. But yeah, I mean, Quake sort of has gone off the deep end a little bit in recent memory.
What was
so yeah?
Are they
guess
still even
besides,
doing Quake stuff?
well, there was Quake Champions, which I think JT you talked about a couple of episodes ago.
Yeah, that's just the arena thing, and I'd like. Yeah, it would be cool to see them go back into the storyline of Quake because I think it's it's simple. It's not a super intricate storyline or anything, but it's it's a lot of fun. It's like you're fighting aliens and stuff, and there's this sort of supernatural element sometimes.
Was Quake 4 the last like major line Quake game?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. If I think I was looking at that the other day, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, that is. It was, yeah, that was developed by Raven Software using the Quake 3, sorry, Doom 3 engine and published by Activision. So yeah, it wasn't quite,
Right.
yeah. So I'm not really sure what that's like, but yeah, at some point I will get into playing that, so I can report back on the similarities with that and probably Doom 3.
Yeah. Well, we're sort of getting a bit nostalgic here, talking about like fond memories of old video game characters. And Timmy, I think you've been playing something which fits that bill as well.
Yeah, so you remember last episode or maybe the episode before, I was talking about playing Sonic Forces and having a really good time with this kind of modern interpretation of Sonic that, by all reports, was very faithful to the original, but like had a lot of new stuff. One of the games available on PS Plus, I think, or maybe it was just like on sale and I got it, was a game called Sonic Mania, which I have installed as well. And that is pretty much a remaster of a lot of the old original levels. So it's got your Green Hill zones and your Hydro City and all the kind of places that you'll recognize from Sonic 1 and 2 and 3. I don't know what the actual names are. Sonic and Tails, Sonic and Knuckles, whatever they're called. But it's a lot of the classic levels. It's all, side scroller platformer. It's none of the upgraded stuff from Sonic Forces, but it is. I've been having an absolute amazing time with it. I've told you our household is a Sonic household. Shayla's played them her whole life. The boys are really into it. So, I was always going to get the game, but having a go myself, I've just been blown away by how good like the level design is and the sprite design and like kind of the scope of a lot of these levels. And the whole time I've been playing it, I've just been sitting here going, if this was on Nintendo, like if Sega had the other titles to back this up, it'd be like Mario Who, because the level design is so much better. The gameplay, I thought it was just like hold it down and get to the end of each level as fast as you can. That's in my mind what Sonic was, but it's not that at all. There's so much to it, and I've been so impressed.
So, unlike the first game you talked about, Timmy, this is one I absolutely have heard about. Like I've heard, when it came out, I heard like glowing reviews about this as kind of like a return to form, even though, like you say, it's kind of a bit of a remake of the old ones. How much is there in terms of like up-resing and stuff? Like, does this look like you're playing Sonic from like 15 years ago, or does it look like sort of a modern remake of that gameplay style?
So it looks like 16-bit.
Right.
I guess it's that much. It's like still really colorful and stuff. It's still like very much like the square pixels and stuff. It's obviously been redesigned for the bigger screens. Like it doesn't look like it's stretched at all. And I've got a big widescreen TV. So I know they rebuilt it, but I think they did it with the plan not to really change too much.
Mm-hmm.
They it's not like they've added cutscenes. It's not like it runs super smoothly or anything like that. It still looks like those old ones. Like if you can download Sonic 1 and 2 as mobile apps now. I don't notice a discernible difference. Like it's not like they've smoothed it out. It's still very much like the pixels and whatnot, which I think is a big part of its charm.
I'd be quite interested in checking this one out actually, because I never really played Sonic like when I was a kid at all. Like I didn't really have consoles, which we talked about before, but I kind of played Mario at friends' houses because they always had Nintendos. But I never really played Sonic outside like one or two times where I did exactly what you said before. It was just run fast and get to the end, and that was my appreciation for Sonic. And like this being kind of a homage to the original games, but sort of, put together so it's more playable now on modern consoles. This kind of gets me interested as a way to experience a bit of gaming history in sort of a modernized way.
Yeah, so like Shayla's a wizard at these games because, like I said, she's been playing them like since she was a kid, and so she's showing me all of the secret areas and how to get to the bonus levels and stuff. And I'm looking at them going, have they added these for this Sonic Mania? And no, this is all in the original. Like if you hit a checkpoint, it sparkles, and if you jump into it while it's sparkling, it takes you to like this bonus level where you are behind Sonic on a 3-dimensional world. And you kind of always flat behind him, and when you turn, the world turns under you, and you have to collect all of these blue dots without hitting any of the red ones. And it's really difficult, but it looks great and it's slick. And that's not the only bonus level. There's another running one where you have to chase down a UFO, and the courses get more and more complex, and you've got a time limit. And whether or not you achieve that, then you're zapped back into the world to continue your mission, like the normal game level, Green Hill Zone Act 1 or whatever.
I remember those bonus levels really, really well, Timmy, because I think I was probably in the Sega / Sonic camp back when I was younger, because we had the Mega Drive. And I remember, going into the 3D bonus level, especially being mind blown, because I was like, hang on, this shouldn't be possible on this kind of thing. And after all these years later, there's actually a YouTube channel that I'm subscribed to whose name evades me at the moment, because they only upload videos very rarely. But it's basically a programmer who used to work on those games, and he breaks down how they did all that stuff. And I remember in particular, he did an episode on the Sonic games and the bonus levels like that one. And apparently it was just like this mind-blowing trickery of maths and programming that caused them to be able to do that kind of thing. And yeah, I suggest people look that up, because I can't find what the guy's name is. But yeah, just thought that I'd throw that in there, because it's cool that they've still, that's still sort of impressive even now after all these years.
Well, yeah, that was exactly why I had to ask Shayla, like, because I was like, this can't have been on the Mega Drive, right? Like, look how good this looks. Like, I've played other games with the Mega Drive and they're all flat, like the whole time, But it's not only those cool 3D levels that really floored me. A lot of the character animations, like if you make a jump and you land right on the edge, Sonic or whoever you're playing will kind of like teeter on the edge and kind of like swing their arms to keep themselves balanced and stuff. Most games have like the little kind of thinking animations, but there's a whole host of different animations that each of the characters do, whether it's when they finish the course, or they'll sit down or lie down if you haven't moved for long enough, or they'll look at their watch or tap their foot, like all these kinds of really cool things that I like, in this day and age, not that impressive, but like thinking about when this game came out, I'm just
attention
so
to detail.
impressed. Yeah.
I remember the tapping the foot thing. That used to be so cool. I remember also the other thing that, like, I kind of still feel it to this day, but back when I was playing that when I was younger, every time Sonic used to land on the spikes, just the sound and the way he like pokes up and you lose all your rings, like used to give me pins and needles in my feet. Very effective.
There's a bit in the new Sonic movie where he has all his a sack and he gets hit and they go flying, and they just use that exact sound bite.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but like, even like, again, I'm going to keep comparing it to Mario, right? Because it's kind of like the Beatles versus the Stones kind of argument with Sonic and Mario, right? And Sonic, you're always moving left to right, and you can go kind of up and down pipes, I suppose, but it's always left to right. And once you move right, you can't go back left again, You also can only get so high on the levels where they intend you to get that high. Whereas in these levels, I want to see them mapped on a big piece of paper, like a blueprint, because some of them are mind-boggling. There are so many different ways to make it to the end, and often by the end you're funneled into one of the last channel. But along the way there, you can go up really high, you can go down really low, or you can take 2 or 3 different roads through the middle. You can go around a loop that sends you back towards, like, as if you're heading towards the left again, but then that takes you down so that you can go a different way forward. If you're Tails, you can fly, so you can get up higher to places that you can't get as Sonic. If you're Knuckles, you can climb up the walls, and he's the only character that can do that. So there's all these special places that you can't get to unless you know the game expertly and are playing the right character. And just the absolute breadth and width of these levels, it's incredible for when it came out. Again, like I've just been sitting here absolutely floored at what the Sonic games actually are, and thinking, if Sega had the other titles, right? Like if it had more stuff, if that was, it's like Sega was like, what was it called? Like Beta Max versus Nintendo's VHS. It's just the one that people went for, you know? And so
Yeah.
it succeeded. Like if Sonic had been on the Nintendo from the start, I reckon it would have been one of the biggest video games ever. I mean, it still is, and it's a testament to how good the game is.
Yeah, I always found Sonic just so so much more exciting because, you know, you're doing all the loop-de-loops and you go flying through the air and you're like, oh, where's he going to land? And yeah, it was just...
And you watch people doing the speed run and you go, oh, they go down the loop and that launches them, and so they land on that and they just keep going. But when you play it yourself, you realize like you have to hit jump at the perfect time, or that through the loop and that run, you're stopping dead like a few seconds later, you know? It's actually a lot to it.
All right, well, that is some of the stuff we've been playing, and we're going to take a little quick break now, and then we're going to come back and I think we're going to talk a bit about some driving games, because it's a genre that all of us are quite interested in, and we've all been kind of dipping our toes in that again over the last couple of weeks. So we'll be back in a minute with some more video games.
Racing games.
Alrighty, welcome back. Now, sometimes at this point, we like to jump straight into like a bit of a topic or maybe some listener mail or something a bit different. But we've been playing just so much that we're going to keep rolling with the various things we've been spending our time on. And Paul, I don't reckon we've heard from you today.
You would be right. So the main thing that I've been playing in the last couple of weeks, and even before that, is Forza 7. So this is Forza Motorsport 7. People would know that the series kind of split off into Forza Motorsport and Forza Horizon a few years ago. And I've been a massive fan of the Forza series since Forza 2 on I think it was the Xbox 360 that one was on. And Forza is, I guess you kind of say it's a sim, but it's one of those games that kind of, it sits right on the boundary between sim and arcade. And I guess one of the reasons for that is because it's a bit of a jack of all trades of driving games. And one of the biggest attractions for me in the Forza series is just the amount of content. So this game has like 700 and something cars. It has something like 20 or 30 unique tracks, and just a huge variety of kinds of racing. So it's got like, it's mainly focused around like circuit racing and things like that. So there's no like open world or anything. But it's, even within circuit racing, it's got like NASCAR, it's got open wheel, it's got like Le Mans stuff, it's got drag racing, it's got classic cars, it's got modern cars, and it kind of has that, it's got that range of cars that something like Gran Turismo, which was around before Forza, has, and it's got that same kind of idea that you can kind of drive your car. So it has a bunch of kind of crappy cars that real people might own, and then it has that all the way up to the kind of ridiculous Ferraris that, you know, there are only 5 of made in the world and things like that.
The realism aspect for me, sorry, Timmy, also, you know, when you're talking about it being on the sort of on the fence between the two, arcade and realism, is also just how scalable the game is in terms of difficulty. And, you know, you can choose to have like, you know, different assists on and different, you know, visual cues and visual aids on. And the thing I love about the Motorsport series is that when you activate and deactivate those things, you get a bonus. You know, the harder that you make the game, you get, there's sort of an incentive. And as you know, like, you know, I love an incentive for making something more difficult.
Well,
and I
JT,
think that still has carried over into number 7.
I got some bad news for you.
Oh God.
So the assist system, I agree, is really good. Like I love how customizable it is. That the game, it has such like granular detail in your assists, which I really appreciate. You can kind of you can tailor the game to never having played a driving game or playing with a wheel. But they removed the bonus credits for harder assists, which I don't understand why that's removed. You still get bonus
Damn.
credits for harder AI difficulty, which again is cool. But they got rid of the exact system you're talking about, where if you remove the braking assist, they give you a 5% bonus to your winnings at the end of a race. And I loved that system because there's already an incentive, just maybe in terms of making the game more interesting, to take those assists off. But I loved that they gave you a tangible reward every time you kind of pushed yourself a little bit higher. So it's actually, we're off to a bad start in that they've removed that from Forza 7.
I really would like to know what the logic or reasoning was behind that, because I never ever read anywhere when I'm looking at forums and reviews for Forza 6, was that ever an issue? So I'm really curious as to what made them want to remove that aspect of it.
Yeah, me too, actually. I think I sometimes, very broadly speaking, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Forza. I absolutely love all the stuff I talked about before, just the amount of content. I love, in general, the driving model. Like, I think it feels so good to drive, and I love the kind of differences between the cars that feel pronounced enough that when you switch to a different discipline of racing, you have to alter your playstyle. I love that it has that kind of detail in it. But the sort of off-track stuff, every Forza they seem to make a bunch of changes that are just like you said, there's no real reason for them. It's like a system that works perfectly well. They just overhaul that for the next game, almost just for the sake of change, which is really frustrating.
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask that, if that's kind of what I guess you answered it, but are they doing it for the sake of change? It's like, oh, we can't ship the same thing. Well, you can ship the same thing if it, why try and fix something that's not broken? Just, change the content. That's all you really need to change, right?
Right. And I guess the big things to talk about here are sort of the career mode and the kind of driver progress through the game. So you have, well, maybe I'll talk about the career mode first, because if we'd done this podcast 2 weeks ago, I would have been coming in here to bitch about the way they have done career mode in Forza 7, but I'm actually just an idiot and I didn't properly read the way the whole thing works. And so I got halfway through the career, which I've now finished, and realized that they've actually nailed career for maybe the first time in a Forza game. So previous Forzas have had all these kind of different systems for how you progress through the game. So the earlier ones had a really bad system where you had to win every single race. So if you didn't come first in a race, you had to redo it again to progress to like the next thing. And I really hated that system because it sort of pushed you to make the game easier, because the only way to get through was by winning. So you were kind of disincentivized to challenge yourself, which I didn't particularly like. And then more recent Forza games have used a system where you finish in the top 3 and you progress, which I actually think is really good as well. Or not as well, sorry, but it's better than the finishing first thing, because you can set it up so you have a battle for third and you still move forward through the career. Forza 7, the way it works is you have kind of a series of cups that you progress through. I think there are 6 of them in the game, and to win each cup, you need to amass a certain number of points, and you gain points no matter what position you finish in a race. And they've completely removed the requirement to win basically any race in the entire game. All you have to do is hit the points total and you move on to the next cup. And they have so many different kinds of series in each cup that, like, if I was winning races, I was unlocking the next cup after doing like 2 or 3 of the 12 series that were available. And so I think this is a really great system because it gives you a huge amount of variety. You can pick which kinds of cars you want to race. And if you want to, you can make it really hard. So you're finishing like 10th every race. and you'll still gain a little bit of points. Eventually, you'll tick over the amount you need, and you'll unlock the next lot of races.
I'm really, really happy to hear about that, actually, because I've always had a bit of an issue with racing games that only have progression through, having like a podium finish.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's so many of them that do that. And that's obviously the really simple way to do it. But, it's much more realistic, maybe not completely realistic, but it's much more realistic to have the points-based system like they do in actual championships. And again, it sounds like it allows for much more natural progression through the ranks. And also, just to sort of go back, like, because I'm still playing Forza 6, even though I have Forza 7 sort of in the cupboard. But, one of the things, and I think we've talked about this before, just personally, Paul, is Forza 6, the progression and the career mode almost feels just like a series of showcases. It's like old car race, Lamborghini race, this race, that it's not really there's no real linkage between each race properly.
So Forza 7 is the same, really. Like, I think this is one of the... I kind of forgive Forza a bit for this, because I feel like there's not really any other way to do it if you want to cover the huge variety of racing that they do. Like, I can't think of a way that they can link like vintage Formula One to go-karts and things like that. They just have to accept that, like you say, it kind of feels like each series is a showcase for a different kind of racing. And I know I've kind of accepted that, and I enjoy it. I do have some issues with that system, because the way Forza used to work up until Forza 4 was you had those kind of races like you're saying. So you'd have, like a vintage supercar race, and you'd have to have like a car built before the 1970s that was like a supercar, things like that. And you go through a bunch of races like that, but then they'd also have these just open tournaments where the cars in Forza are grouped into classes based on how powerful they are, from like D class up to A class, and then they have some higher ones after that. And they'd have these open races where it would just say, bring literally any car in the game. It just has to be A class, and then you race a tournament against a bunch of other A class cars. And I really loved that, because I remember in Forza 2, I had like a Mini Cooper, which I got at the very start of the game, and I slowly upgraded it. So by the end, it was competitive against like the Ferraris that you'd race against. And you can't do that in Forza 7 now, because every car is locked to its division. So if you get a Mini Cooper, it's locked to like the classic compact cars division. If you race it in career mode, you can only use it against other cars from that division, and they're performance limited for that division. So it's like, an old Mini Cooper is slow, so you can only race it in career against other slow similar cars. And I find that really annoying, because one of the things I love about a game like this is taking a car, upgrading it, and kind of continuing to use it.
And I think that's professional racing in real life as well. We like to watch touring cars because they are just, family sedans that have just been like completely maxed out for racing. And so it's a bit disappointing to hear that they're sort of depriving that sort of essence of racing in a way.
Right. I guess for that specific example, I guess Forza does have those cars. So, you can buy the street version of some sedan, and then it probably has the race version for touring cars. But, you don't get to kind of upgrade that yourself. You just buy the next car. So, yeah, the kind of way they handle cars, I think, is not great. The thing that really saves Forza is the career mode is fun, and I've been enjoying it, but the free play mode in the game, I think, is the best part of the game. So it's super, super versatile, and all of these kinds of races that career mode no longer has, you can set those up in free play. So my Mini Cooper that's as fast as a modern Ferrari, it's useless to me in career, but I can go into free play mode and I can set up a whole bunch of races against those cars, and I can use my totally upgraded, tiny little hatchback against those kind of cars, and that's probably the main attraction for me. And I've spent probably just as much time as I have in career mode going into free play mode and setting up the kind of interesting races that I want. And that's kind of the example that I gave there of, a car I've upgraded against other cars, but it's also things like big, long endurance races with multiple classes. So it's like kind of, like Le Mans style racing, that kind of thing. You're able to set all those up there, and that's really, really cool.
So I kind of get it with Le Mans, right? But for me, I'm a very objective-driven gamer. That's why traditionally I like games with a narrative versus games where you just explore and discover things for yourself. I don't like just being left to my own devices. I like knowing what the next thing is. So what you're describing there, like the career mode, absolutely sounds more appealing to me. That's what I like to do in racing games, or at least in the Need for Speed games. It's not a career, but you still hit objectives to level up. When you do these free play races, so you get to have the fun of using your Mini Cooper that you've absolutely souped up, do you get anything like parts to upgrade other cars that you can use in your career mode, or experience to take you to other levels, or is it literally just for the joy of racing this car that you like?
You earn like credits and experience in everything you do in the game, and at the same rate. So when I go into free play mode and I do a 10-lap race with my Mini Cooper, I earn the same credits and experience I earn from doing a 10-lap race with another car in career mode.
And then you can use that to upgrade a car that you do need for career mode to help you advance more quickly through career, for example?
Right. That's basically it. You can use that in everything. I guess the one thing about like just sort of the way career mode progresses, because of the things I mentioned before about kind of locking cars to divisions, you don't really get a car and upgrade it to go through career. You buy new cars. So you earn the credits to basically buy the next car for the division that you need to compete in next. I guess with a game with 700 cars, that's kind of the thing they've gone for. It's like rather than having 10 cars and you kind of upgrade them and keep using them, like they want you to have 300 cars.
Okay, gotcha. Do you mind if I ask you a question that's kind of changing? It's still on Forza, but it's not at all about career or free play.
I don't mind at all.
Okay, great. I was just going to say, you mentioned like at the start, you and JT really like these kinds of games, like the circuit racing, and that you really love Forza for a lot of things. The variety of courses is probably not one of them, though. I was going to ask you about that because, I haven't played a lot of Forza. I think I had a really early one back on 360. It might have come with it. And I haven't ever played the Gran Torinos, but I played a lot of rally games. And the reason I gravitate towards those is just the difference in the different circuits and the courses and stuff. Like on Colin McRae 2004 or whatever I had, you got the amazing Japanese courses through the hills, which are a combination of tarmac and dirt, and then you've got Spanish ones which are going through like the countryside, and then you got like the middle of Europe, which is sometimes the German countryside, sometimes it's like a really muddy further northern Europe kind of course, and they just seem very different, and that's what appeals to me. And I looking at games like Forza and Gran Turismo and whatnot, I go, are the courses going to remain interesting like after a few hours of gameplay if it's all closed circuits?
I would say if you don't like circuit racing, then you're not going to like Forza, because it doesn't.
But to be clear, I'm not saying that I don't. I'm saying that I haven't done it because I'm skeptical of the variety of courses.
Well, Forza has a lot. I think it's like I said at the start. It's one of the real strengths of this game is it has so many tracks. It has a lot of tracks. Each of them have different versions of them. So you have like the Le Mans track, which has the massive one that they do in the 24-hour race, but then it also has a much smaller version of it that you can kind of do for a shorter race and things like that. I think it has a great variety of tracks. I really like the kind of process of learning the tracks in a way that I feel you kind of don't in some other racing games. So in other racing games, you kind of just you race and you get through the race, then you move on and you're done. Whereas I like the kind of progression you have in Forza where you learn a track and there are certain tracks that come up where I'm like, oh, I'm really good on Laguna Seca, because I've raced it through the last like 7 generations of Forza, and I know it like the back of my hand. And
Right.
For me, I also like that the tracks are real, because sort of following real life motorsport, a lot of the tracks are in like the Formula One season and things like that. So I know them from that, and it's kind of fun to have that sort of realism. The tracks I actually really don't like in Forza are their made up ones. They have a bunch of like real world location tracks that are, there's like a Rio one in Brazil, a Prague one, and then a Dubai one, and maybe a couple of others. And I actually really don't like those because they don't feel like real tracks. They feel like video game tracks.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, like, I've always loved the variety of the Forza tracks. You know, even just going on the real ones. You know, from an environment sort of perspective. You know, you've got massive variety. You know, like you said, Laguna Seca, which is like a weird sort of. I'm not sure where it actually is. Is it Spain?
No, it's in America.
Maybe. Oh, it's America, but it's got, you know, it's like sort of like desert, you know, sort of like super arid sort of, you know, landscape, and it's got the famous corkscrew, you know, it's very, very hilly terrain, and then you can go to, I think, I'm just trying to think if Monaco is one of the.
It's not in Forza.
Monaco is not in one of the one, is it? Yeah. I'm just trying to think of the one I'm thinking of.
Well, there's races like Spa, which is
Mount Panorama's in there as well, which is actually I actually really do like racing on Mount Panorama.
Yeah, it has. Mount Panorama's really good, and it's actually, you know, for any like Aussie racing fans, it has a bunch of V8 supercars, and it has Mount Panorama, and like that's part of the fun of it, I think, is recreating a lot of real world stuff. So if you want, you can race like Bathurst in this. You can race Mount Panorama, you can set it up to go for like 7 hours, and you can do it in V8 supercars. And like that's a real big part of the appeal for me, and I find that I think Forza is at its best when you're using those kind of racing cars. So not like road cars, but the kind of cars like you said, JT, before, touring cars or like Le Mans sports cars or V8 supercars. I feel like everything in the game works best at that sort of high level of racing. It's like it's all tuned for that.
I'm slightly confused. So did you say that the Rio track, I think that's the one I was thinking of, because it reminded me of Monaco a little bit. Is that not a real track?
No, it's just a like made up location one.
I thought that one was actually quite good. That's actually one of my favorite circuits.
Yeah, I find that they have a lot of like unrealistic corners, because they have like, you know, big dramatic corners where you sweep around landmarks and things like that. And I don't know,
I guess, yeah.
I enjoy that stuff in like a Need for Speed game or a Burnout game and things like that. But I think when I'm playing Forza, I really want my realism to be there, and so the kind of circuits that don't feel real kind of get under my skin a bit.
So one of the things in Forza 6 that I thought was a massive cop-out and was very disappointed to find out was in the game was the mod system, where you earn completely arbitrary upgrades to a race advantage or a car advantage, and it's got nothing to do with the actual modding you've done to the car or tuning you've done to the car rather. Is that has that transitioned over to Forza 7, and is it bothering you, or how do you see that?
It is still here. They've tweaked it a bit. This is probably something they've tweaked to be better. So I remember in 6 it was kind of very gamey, felt like arcadey. Like you could give yourself like a bit of a boost by using a mod and things like that. The way this one works is you earn bonus credits for your mod, but they're usually tied to the assists. So you could say in a way that this is where they took the bonuses from turning assists off and they've put them in the mods one. So, I could use a mod which gives me 50% bonus credits for having full simulation damage, or a mod gives me 60% extra credits if I don't use rewinds during the race and things like that. You buy the mods off like an in-game store, not for real money, just for credits, and they always work out as good value. So you never really buy a mod and lose money. It will always eventually once it kind of gives you the bonus credits, it will deliver on the money that you're getting. I still think that the old system is better. I would just rather they say you just get 5% credits from everything if you slowly push your assists up. Because I feel like this is a very gamey system, you know, it's like choose your 3 mods for this race and then like buy new ones from the store. Like just give me a flat bonus for choosing to like not have a braking assist on or something like that.
One of the things just going on, you know, sort of going off that and the credit system, in 6 and sort of, I think every Forza I've played, 3, 4, and 6, I didn't play 5, credits became a non-issue like very quickly. So after, you know, I think the first career series, I had amassed so many credits through the prize spins and XP bonuses and, you know, race wins and stuff. Even at a harder difficulty, you know, what I would class, you know, almost simulation. Like it just wasn't. It didn't become an issue, and I kind of felt like that was a bit of a cop out as well. Like, you know, it was never something I had to manage. Was the credits and the money, and you know, when you're talking about racing, and especially in a game, you know, that's usually a big part of any game. Is, you know, making sure you've got enough money to spend on your upgrades. Have you found that in Forza 7?
It depends what you're talking about. Like if you're talking about specifically upgrades, I agree. I think, again, since Forza 4, which I think Forza 4 is probably the high point of the series, since Forza 4, upgrades have been made. They've been de-emphasized by the game, and so they've been made cheaper and cheaper to the point where in Forza 7, you're just given the upgrades when you buy the car to like perfectly min-max your car for whatever division it's in, which is a bit annoying. It takes that kind of fun process of figuring out how you can squeeze the most performance out of your car. It just takes that away from you, which is kind of crap. But if you're talking about buying cars, like I played Forza 6 as well. I never ever had the money in Forza 6 to buy all the cars I wanted because some of them are so insanely expensive. And Forza 7 for me is the same. Like I try to keep about 2 million credits just as a base amount in case a car comes up. They have these kind of weekly sales on cars, and I try to keep about 2 million in case a car comes up with a discount that I really want. But in general, like it's difficult for me to get above that because I'm always spending money on new cars. So I would actually say the experience for me in terms of that has been the complete opposite.
Right. Yeah. Because I think, you know, the experience that I've wanted, you know, was like going back to Gran Turismo 3, I think, was when, you know, I last remember playing a game that was similar to Forza, where, you know, I was pressed for credits and I had to sell or upgrades to a car. I had to sell a car or an old car just to afford something for a better car. And like, I really miss having that. But, you know, again, it's obviously very different depending on the person playing or how they're playing it as well.
Yeah, I feel like I said before, it's like as the number of cars has increased in Forza, they've just pivoted it to kind of incentivize you to drive as many cars as possible rather than stick with a car and upgrade it, which, you know, it has its pros and cons. I think there's a lot of filler in terms of that car list. You know, you have like a Honda Civic, and they have the Honda Civic from like 2013, 2015, and 2017. And you kind of wonder, like, do I really need like 3 versions of a modern car 2 years apart where basically nothing changes? I think they could probably trim that 700 cars by at least 100 or 200 and just kind of, you know, have a bit of a more diverse list. But, you know, who knows the reasons behind that? I'm guessing there's some money changing hands every time a car appears in a Forza game, just like it does in any driving game.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, like I said, the diversity is a strength of Forza, but it's also a bit of a weakness because trying to cover so many different racing disciplines means that in some ways it doesn't have enough depth in any of them, which can get a bit frustrating. But the other game that I've been playing in terms of racing games is F1 2019, the latest Formula One game. And this is kind of the complete opposite to that. This is, you know, the game that is completely focused on one racing discipline with, you know, the minimum number of cars and tracks to just play Formula One. And I've been really loving this as well because it does all the things that Forza doesn't. So it has all the depth and the detail of just Formula One. You know, if you're not interested in Formula One, there is no reason at all to ever play this game because that's the only kind of racing you get. But it has such a great simulation of the Formula One racing experience. And the last one of these I actually played was, I think, Formula One like 2010, something like that. So it's been almost a decade since I've played a Formula One game. And they really have come so far in terms of simulating how Formula One works. It has so much of the real world kind of... This is kind of difficult to describe, but Formula One is so much about data because everything is down to like half second in terms of, you know, your pit stop strategy or what tires you're using. And previous Formula One games, I felt you had, you know, a lot of racing and stuff like that, but it didn't get that nitty gritty thing where like half a second on the tiniest thing matters. This game really does. They feed you so much data while you're racing that it's really awesome. So we've talked before about kind of the like your user interface of games being a bit too busy. This game has a really busy UI, so you have so much information on the screen when you're driving, but it's all actually really important to you know, racing a Formula One race. And it has this really cool thing where you can request extra information at any time from like your race engineer. So you can request like information on the car in front of you, information on the car behind, what tires they're on, what their fuel strategy is, you know, who's got the fastest lap, how long are your tires going to last, you know, what's your possible pit strategies that you could choose now or change to. And because that stuff is such a big deal in real life F1, I love that it's all in the game. And it kind of, JC, you said this when we were talking off air about racing games a few days ago. You made this point that Forza does a great job of simulating on-track racing, but it doesn't simulate off-track stuff as well. So it doesn't have kind of the rules and the depth and the detail that goes into like motorsport as a whole. F1 2019 absolutely has all that off-track simulation, but specifically for Formula One.
Yeah, and I feel like that's especially what you want in Formula One, because motorsport it's so much more than just the driver and the car. Like,
right,
F1 is literally, you know, that's why they've got, you know, you've got a drivers' championship and then the constructors' championship, like, or the, you know, which team is the best, not just the driver. You know, all the money that's spent on just, like you said, like just learning more about, you know, the conditions of the race. And
right.
that's actually one thing I wanted to know. Like, you know, really the main question I have for F1 2019 is, what's the team management like? Like, what's the non-driving aspect where you're talking about your pit crew and your team managers and, like you said, the race engineer? Like, what's that off-track management system like? Is that like almost like a game in itself?
I am very glad you asked this. So it has a really cool like car development system that works as you go through the season. So for anyone who doesn't know, the way a Formula One kind of weekend works is you have practice sessions at the start where everyone just drives and, like, you know, tests out different things. Then you have qualifying to determine where they start the race. Then you have the race. F1 2019 has all of these in, but they've done a really cool thing with practice sessions where you don't just go out for an hour and drive laps of the track, because, you know, that's going to get boring in a game at some point. But what they basically have is they have all these different kind of like mini goals that you choose to do. So when you go into a practice session, you can choose to do, for example, it's like a track acclimatization test. So what you do is you go out with 3 laps of fuel and you have to basically hit all these gates, kind of, you know, holographic gates that they put around the track to show that you're taking all the right racing lines. And then, you know, once you get a high enough score with that, it's kind of gamified. You go back into the pits and you choose a new one. And maybe the next one is like fuel management or like tire management. So you have to go out on like a certain set of tires and make them last for a certain number of laps. And each one of these things that you do, you gain points. And then you use those points off track in the team management part of it to upgrade your car. And it's a really cool system where you can kind of choose the direction that upgrades are going. So you can choose to be going for more speed. You can choose to be going for like more downforce to have better handling and things like that. But the way they've linked racing and specifically like practice sessions with development is really, really cool.
So you might have just answered it there, but I was going to ask you, when you were mentioning, how much data they're throwing at the player in this game, assume that I am interested in circuit racing, but I'm not familiar with F1 as a sport at all. Would all of the data that they're giving you be overwhelming for someone kind of just who's picked up F1 because they're like, that looks like a fun racing game, and then all of a sudden all this data is coming at them? Or is that practice stuff kind of, do they lead you into it so that you get an understanding of what kind of thought process is required, or is that kind of separate what you were just talking about there?
This is a good question. I think the practice stuff does introduce you to a lot of the different systems like that. There may be earlier tutorials that do. I should say now, I've been playing the trial version of this game, which gives you 8 days to just play the game as if you own it. And so I actually skipped all of the early career tutorial stuff because I was just kind of wanted to get into it. And so there is a whole initial part of the game where you drive Formula 2s, which are the level below Formula 1. And I think probably they introduce you to a lot of it there. And then you make the step up into Formula 1. But yeah, I just skipped it all because I kind of had a week to play. So, I just wanted to get into the stuff that I was interested in.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Also, random aside that I just thought of, you know how it's called Formula 1
Mm-hmm.
or Formula 2? What is the formula? Why do they use that word?
E equals MC squared, Timmy. That's the formula.
Like I thought that was obvious.
I think I'm not sure. This is off my head and I'm not even looking it up. And Paul could probably answer it better, but I've always just figured that formula is just the type of car that it is, like in very basic terms. It's just like the fastest kind of car.
Well, I understand what it represents. I just wondered why they chose the word in this instance.
Do you know, Paul?
I have no idea, and I have no idea, and there's all different. Like you said, there's Formula 1, there's Formula 2, there's Formula
2000,
yeah,
Formula Ford, Formula Mazda, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, there's all different kinds of formula. I feel like
it could just be like restrictions.
I think
restrictions and things.
Yeah, like as an answer to Timmy's question specifically, I have no idea why they use the word formula. I think it might be the idea, JT, what you said, that Formula Forward. The idea there is that the formula of car that you have to use is a specific kind of Ford.
Okay, so I have actually found the answer.
Okay.
This is just a quick Google, but this is from a tutorial website of some kind. So take it with a grain of salt, but it seems reasonable. Formula 1 racing, government sanctioned by the body FIA. The name formula comes from the set of rules that the participating cars and drivers must follow. That seems pretty straightforward to me, I think. So I guess it is just, the things that the cars can and can't be, and obviously just the racing rules.
All right, we have an answer.
There you go.
There you go. From the most unlikely of sources, a video gaming podcast.
Yeah.
Break so discs and dice.
So tune in next week where we'll be transitioning to a 100% motorsport themed podcast.
Feel free to send in any questions at all, because we can now we've got Google. We can answer whatever you want to know.
Imagine that. It's like you send us your question and we'll Google it.
Yeah, it just turns into it's a trivia podcast now.
We're gonna end up doing like relationship advice or like philosophy.
Anyway, so yeah, those are the games I've been playing. Very driving focused. Kind of reiterating that I really love both, but for very different reasons. I think kind of they work really well together because the F1 game kind of gives me the things that the Forza game isn't giving me. Like
qualifying. Pretty big one.
Yeah, we didn't mention that actually. The
that's
Forza
one
games,
thing when you brought it up.
Yeah, the Forza games have not had qualifying I don't know if they ever have had qualifying, but it's such a massive oversight for a game that is called Forza Motorsports. Like, I understand why some of the other detail of real life racing is not there in the game, but just make it optional. Just let me do qualifying, and if I want to skip it and just race, just put a skip button there. It's ridiculous that it's not in.
Just quickly before we move on, Paul, one thing I really I am curious about, not having played any F1 games, but in this latest iteration, the atmosphere of driving, specifically the team banter. So if you watch Formula One, most motorsports have it, but Formula One especially have the drivers and the pit team are constantly talking to each other over radio. Is it got that sort of thing happening, to sort of set the mood?
It does, actually. It's really cool. Like, as part of the kind of the amount of information that you're being given, you have your race engineer, and that's the person who you can ask for any more info on. So those things I said before, like if you want to ask who's ahead of me, you kind of use your little D-pad and you flick over to that, and then while you're driving, they'll give you like who it is, how far ahead, what's their lap time, what tires are they on, and then randomly throughout the race, they'll kind of give you little updates on things. So they'll tell you like, just a reminder that you've got to pit in the next 5 laps, or so-and-so is pulling away from you in front, so you've got to speed up, or they're catching you, someone behind you is catching up, and things like that. So you do get that kind of back and forward, or it's not really back and forward because, you can't talk, but you get that kind of one-way thing with the team, it's really cool. It definitely like builds the atmosphere around that.
Very cool.
But yeah, I think there's a few other driving games that some of us have been playing, but we probably haven't quite got into them enough to discuss here. But do look out for future driving discussions in some upcoming Disc and Dice episodes. But as we're running short on time, we're going to move things on here to a little bit of listener mail, which we have received recently. This one comes in from Josh, who is our regular email correspondent. So he says, "Hey Disc and Dice crew, if you could only play games from one of the following publisher platforms from now on, which would you pick? EA Origin, Epic Games, Bethesda Launcher, Blizzard Battle.net, Ubisoft Uplay. Love the show. Thanks, Josh."
All right. First of all, I love that you've referred to him as our regular email correspondent, because now it sounds like he's like a foreign correspondent out in the field.
Out in the field, yep.
He's like really
bulletproof vest.
Yeah,
he's got an ear to the ground.
We do pay him to send these emails in. So yeah,
man on the ground, Josh.
Man at the keyboard, Josh.
Yeah. Now we had a bit of a chat about this one offline, because the immediate first thing you do is go, well, why wouldn't Steam and GOG be in here, right? Because they're the obvious choices, because you get like all of the games. Why limit yourself to only some of the games? And I kind of looked at it and went, oh, well, I think that's not the point. I think he's asking you like if you could only use, the games from those developers, which makes Epic Games the odd man out, because Epic Games is close to something like GOG rather than, EA Origin or Blizzard Launcher, Oh, sorry, Battle.net.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess like,
I would think we have to scratch that from the list.
Epic Games? Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I think we can make this interesting in any way, shape, or form. We have to cross out Epic Games.
Yep.
Or we have to add in Steam and GOG, in which case Steam probably wins. But yeah, get rid of Epic Games, shall we?
I agree.
And then take it from the top?
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
All right, yeah. So I agree. I think you have to do that. This is an interesting one, right? Because it's, at first you feel like, oh, you're just picking which games publisher you'd like to have. But it's like very specifically like, it's almost like it's only the ones who have their own launcher, which is an interesting restriction to have. Because, I think, Timmy, you maybe mentioned this as well. I'd like to have CD Projekt Red games, but, they have GOG, which they kind of own, but, they don't have their own launcher, which is just their game. So we're kind of limited to just a few publishers here.
There's now Rockstar Games have their own launcher now as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and GTA 5, or Red Dead, it's all on the Rockstar Games launcher, which I recently found out.
And that kind of like it's what I was saying about CD Projekt Red. Like if we're looking at the publishers rather than just like if that's what the point of it is, they're my favorite, but I only get one game every 6 or 7 years.
Exactly.
So like, do I go quality over quantity and like do a poll and just go to Russia like a couple of times to really spread out when I can actually play The Witcher?
Like when I look at this, my initial reaction, which is along the lines of what you're saying, Timmy, is I would go Blizzard because then I have WoW. And like probably EA probably have the most games on their launcher of any of these, but that's going to run out eventually, and like WoW's not going to run out.
Yeah, but
WoW is forever.
With EA, the reason I look at that is, I go, all right, well, I'm going to get like new Need for Speed games like every couple of years, right? And I'm going to get like all the sports games as well, depending on which ones I'm into. And if I have to choose one, at least I've got a whole range there. EA have the Star Wars license deal at the moment, so I can play any Star Wars games that come out. I don't think anyone would put their hand up and say that they're EA's biggest fan, right? Like they're kind of like the corporate boogeyman of video gaming. I think they go hand in hand with monetization, but they got so much that I think like if I have to limit myself to one, I'm missing out on the least by going with EA.
Yeah,
I reckon I'm going to have to agree with you there, Timmy, for that very same reason. And just to open it up a little bit more, so I've used all of these platforms. The least I've used is probably the Blizzard.net. So I can't comment too much on the usability of that. But the Ubisoft launcher has caused me so many nightmares trying to play Assassin's Creed games. Like unheard of horror, just trying to get it installed properly and then installing the games and then redeeming the games and switching them over from like Humble Bundle and Steam was just a nightmare. EA games has just always been a straightforward process. So say what you will about their business practices, obviously they're jerks, but the fact is that they've been in the games business for so long, and the Origin launcher has been around for a decent amount of time as well, that I think they've streamlined it enough that I don't really have any issues with it. And their store is set up in such a way that when I'm on the browser, I do make a point to go to the store because I know I'm not going to have issues going through their sales and buying their games that they've sort of promoting, or they've got like some kind of seasonal offer on. Whereas in other ones I can't say the same.
Yeah, I guess that's an insight that I don't have, being a almost solely console gamer. Like I don't have the launches, so I can't really talk about the user experience of that software specifically. I'm just looking at the developers.
I think you're both making good points about EA Origin, but I think
you still want WoW, don't you?
Well, for me, it's probably Blizzard or Bethesda, because I feel like you got a really strong argument with the EA thing, just the sheer weight of content. But I just feel like there's not something there that I'm like super passionate about. Whereas the Blizzard thing definitely has the least. Like I basically get WoW, Diablo, and StarCraft, and like that's a pretty good three. Three that get at least two of those get a lot of content fairly regularly, and maybe I'll get into Overwatch or something like that if that's all I have to play. But then like Bethesda, I've got my Fallout and Skyrim stuff, but with the Bethesda launcher, you also get like all your Doom and Wolfenstein games and stuff like that. So like that's pretty good as well. And I think, if I'm thinking about like a game that really, really excites me, WoW probably does that, Diablo does that, Skyrim and Fallout do that. I can't really think of anything on the EA one. Like I get the logical argument for EA. I just feel like it's a depressing existence where I have an unlimited number of games that are pretty good that I can play, but none that really like blow my mind.
Yeah, in which you can still complain about. I think it's it is quite a difficult question when you really get into it, because it transcends just what the library is. You know, what the developer or the publisher has access to. It goes into so much more than that. You know, like the friend system. You know, like EA has the battle log system with all the battlefields and stuff that, you know, some other games don't have, and I really liked. You know, it sort of, yeah, it's there's a lot of avenues to think about. But yeah, I think my final question is going to be EA.
Yeah, we could have a whole separate discussion about just who has the best launcher. You know, including Steam and GOG, without talking about libraries. But that's not for today.
Yeah, maybe we'll have an episode where we talk about which the worst publisher is, and you know, that can be a 3-hour episode.
Well, look, thanks, Josh, for the letter, and seeing as though that's got us thinking about what games we want to play, why don't we do exactly that and have a bit of a chat about what we're hoping to get to before the next episode. Chum, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking I will obviously continue with Doom 3. I'll definitely have that finished in probably the next week, so well before next episode. By next episode, I'll probably be partway into Doom 2016, so I'll get to sort of give a bit of an update on the jump between, you know, the decade in between those games, or whatever, however many years that is. Now, the other game I do want to start getting into, and by start I mean go back into, is the Crysis series, because as you might not know, or you might have heard, actually, is Crysis number 1 is getting remastered, and I loved Crysis. I think I bought a gaming setup in 2007 just so I could play that game. So EA recently had a sale where they had all the Crysis stuff. You know, you could buy it all basically for like $12. So I just went ahead and bought it. Because I never finished Crysis 2 and I never played Crysis 3. So I'll be getting into those, hopefully, you know, before next pod, so I can sort of start talking about them in light of the remastered Crysis coming out. Apart from that, not much else. But Paul, what about yourself? Where are you going to take us next?
Well, I sort of mentioned before that there's some other racing stuff that a few of us are going to be playing. I want to put some time into Dirt Rally 2, which maybe Timmy will have more to say about. Besides that, I have already been playing a whole lot of Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, which we have talked about before on the pod. I think when it first came out, I talked about it. But I've been playing a lot of it with a couple of friends, and then JT, you've just picked it up, and my brother's just got it. So I feel like we may have a bunch to say about some multiplayer Age of Empires next episode.
Yeah, so I'm going to be getting into some racing. Well, I've recently installed Dirt Rally 2.0, and so I've had a little bit of a go at it, probably not enough to pass judgment just yet. And I'm pretty keen to get into that, because at the moment I'm enjoying simply not coming last. It's about as good as I can do, and that's a lot of fun. So hopefully I can get up to kind of, you know, middle of the table or something by the time we get to talking about it. Other than that, I don't actually have a lot on my radar. You know, try not to spend too frivolously while we're in lockdown. But Grayson has been going through my PlayStation games recently and just going, can I try this? Can I try that? What's this one? Is this one installed? Will I have to download an update for that? What can I play straight away? and one game that worked just straight away was Infamous Second Son, which was almost a launch release for the PS4. And like the third game in the Infamous series for PlayStation, and I loved it. It's the only one I played, and I had such a good time with it. And that one I didn't have to install anything. We popped it in, and it just played straight off the disc, which was refreshing. And you know, it's probably a little bit too advanced for Grayson. He's only 5. So a lot of it was, hey, can you help me do this? Hey, how do I do this? And so, you know, we were kind of playing it together, and it handles really nicely and it looked great. And I'm kind of curious to give it another run through because I enjoyed it so much. And it's got a really, really interesting ARG system in it as well, which I'm keen to revisit. It's very cool. You send stuff to your actual internet account and you
Super
solve
keen to hear about that.
you solve stuff on your laptop and then email it in air quotes back to yourself, and you have it on your phone in the game. It's so rad, man. It's awesome. So I might give that another go if I have the time.
All right. Well, a nice variety of stuff there, which we'll be bringing to you in a couple of weeks' time for the next episode. But if you do want to get in touch and ask us a question, anything like that, you can email us, discanddice@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. We're on Twitter @discanddice. Do get in touch. We always appreciate some listener email. It often gives us an interesting debate to have, like just a few minutes ago from Josh's question. And that's about it for this episode. So thank you guys for being here once again.
Thank you once again.
Pleasure as always.
And we'll be back. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to do another podcast about games, or maybe even we'll just change it to one of those other topics that we suggested throughout this episode. Who knows?
Send us your relationship problems.
Yes, and also send us your things to Google. We'll see everyone in 2 weeks' time. Games.
Games?
Philosophy.